Hello, it's the Music Wizard here, also known as Cool Dude Clem. Technology is moving faster than we can keep up with. We're well into the 21st century now, and I have released the Open Mod Plug Tracker 8-bit chip collection, or something, I haven't decided the name yet. Now this sample pack is free because I'm a nice person. I don't charge extortionate prices for my products, unlike some people do. Look. This is free, you don't have to pay me a penny. Now when most people say 8-bit, they think NES and nothing else, as if that was the only 8-bit system ever made. In fact, I'm sure some people really do think that was the only 8-bit system ever made. But when I say 8-bit, this is what I'm talking about. So, I have sampled 9, count 'em, 9 different sound chips, each with their own characteristic sounds that gives them their personality. So in the sample pack you will find Atari 2600 TIA, the chip that was known as the Pokey, which was used in a lot of Atari's arcade machines and various 8-bit computers, the AY38192, which was also another popular sound chip, basic waveforms, which we'll cover later on, the infamous Commodore 64 SID chip, can't forget that one, various chip drums, Game Boy, NES 2A03, SN76489, which was used in the BBC Micro and the Sega Master System. I should really take bigger breaths before I speak. The VIC-20 chip, and something I don't think anybody has ever sampled before, the ZX Spectrum beeper. Now there's a lot of time and so little to cover, so... No, wait, reverse that. So let's get started. So that was some music on Atari TAA Tracker. Now we're going to hear my rendition of it on Open Mod Plug Tracker. Sounds pretty close, doesn't it? Now, since I've only used 2 channels to recreate this song, just like on the real hardware, let's listen to those 2 channels separately. Bet you want to see the waveforms, right? Well, I'm not going to keep you waiting, so here they are. We have the bass. For some reason I used this same sample twice, I'm not sure why. Noise. And a square. And that's just about it. That's all the sounds I used to recreate the song. Now, you're probably wondering how I did all those fancy arpeggios and drums. Well, that was done using some fancy pitch envelopes. Of course, these aren't the only sounds. We have buzzy rumble, buzzy, electronic rumble, electronic squeal, flangey wavering. If you've ever played Enduro, you'll be familiar with that sound. Pure buzzy, pure combined, pure high, pure low, reedy rumble, and white noise. So let's change the bass to, I don't know, reedy rumble. Let's hear what that sounds like. Sounds even more Atari now. Okay, Atari Pokey, now this is gonna take some explaining. But first, let's do an OpenMPT tracker cover of that lovely Rob Hubbard Jet Set Willy song. Yeah, it's not 100% accurate, but it's still pretty good. So, over in the Samples tab, you can see that only 3 sounds were used here. The bass, a square wave, which was used for pretty much everything else, and the noise. And that's it. So again, it's pretty simple how I've done it. So on channel 1 here, which plays the bass and the snare, first it plays the bass, and then the snare, which consists of a high-pitched beep, immediately followed by the noise. And yeah, the snare is leading a little bit the way I've done this, but it's barely noticeable. So like before, let's change the bass waveform. Let's change it to, this one. Now I'm sure you've noticed that there are a lot of sounds here. You see, not only have I sampled the standard Pokey waveforms, but I've also sampled waveforms from those tricks that you could do. You see, there was one trick you could do where you could have 2 sounds playing but mixed down onto the same channel, so they would sort of interfere with each other and create all kinds of weird and wonderful sounds. Like this one here where channel 1 was playing a C and channel 3 was playing an F. Now, fifths seem to work really well, but other note combinations, not so well. Another thing you could do was create a sort of C64 SID-like sound, which worked in a similar way, or in other words, it ate up 2 channels at once to make the sound. Okay, let's try out our Jet Set Willy with one of these. Okay, so we're getting to the end of the A's now, so let's take a look at the AY38192. And here is that exact same thing in OpenMPT Tracker. Now first off, I just want to address the obvious elephant in the room, which is the fact that this track uses sampled drums. So, it's not all the chip's own sounds, but originally all those sounds were being played back through that chip, so yeah. Anyway, just about every sound is here. Now one thing you might have noticed is that there are some very strangely labelled sounds here, such as low saw plus C, or high triangle plus whatever, and even SID voice. So, what's all that about? Well, the AY chip didn't just do square waves and noise. It also had very fast looping volume envelopes built in, and with these you could create sawtooth waves and even a sort of triangle wave which sounded like this. Now what was really cool is if you had a square wave playing on the same channel as a hardware envelope, because they're not 100% in tune with each other, you'd get this sort of phasing, sort of ring modulate kind of sound, It's easier to show you than to tell you, so I'll demonstrate it. Okay, all we need to do now is make sure it doesn't re-trigger the sample, so that way it'll sound more like how the AY chip would have actually played it. And there we go. And finally, what I want to talk about is the SID voice. Now, this was something that was frequently done on the Atari ST, and like the name suggests, it produced a sort of Commodore 64 SID kind of sound. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add offsets to it, so when it plays that sample, it's going to play that sample further and further away from the start, and that way it's going to sound a bit more authentic. And yeah, that doesn't sound too bad. Now before we go on to some more interesting stuff, let's have a look at something that wasn't sampled from any vintage sound chip but still useful: basic waveforms and pre-made drums. So here I have done a cover of the Stage 1 in-game music from Tubin, and it's all done with a square, a triangle, a saw wave, and drums from the Cheetah Spectrum. Yeah, it sounds okay, but I'm sure we can make this better. So let's change some of the waveforms. I have all the waves here. Here is the sine, the saw, the triangle, the square, two types of noise, and square waves of 24 different pulse widths, ranging from really thin to full-on 50% duty cycle. And of course a nice complement for those is the chip drum samples, which has quite a wide variety of samples. I'm only showing a few of them here, but you can use them pretty much with any of the chip sounds. So with that, and the basic waveforms, you could make something like this. You know, go nuts, you can mix sounds from different sound chips, the sky's the limit. You can make something that sounds like this. So we're about halfway through now, so let's move on to the Nintendo stuff. Can we even say Nintendo on YouTube now? Oh well. And as always, here is my near perfect cover in OpenMPT Tracker. So, as usual, let's go and have a look at the samples I used. Here's the bass, a square wave, the noise, and another square wave. And then of course the instruments that I made from those samples. And of course, before we move on, let's take a look at all the available Gameboy DMG chip samples. You got your basic square with 12.5, 25 and 50% duty cycles, the noises and the weird buzzes that it could do. And in this folder here, over 50 custom samples that you can use. Because you may or may not know that channel 3 on the Game Boy sound chip played custom waves. So, let's have that game over goat from Tetris, you know, as our bass singer, just for the hell of it. Yeah, that sounded just as bad as I thought it would. And now the one that probably everybody has been waiting for, the very definition of 8-bit, apparently, the NES. And of course here is the Open Multiplug Tracker version. As usual, let's see what samples we have. So, the famous triangle sound with all its fuzziness, the noise, and a square. Didn't even need to use any envelopes, apart from the one on the noise to make it sound like a snare drum. Also, to make the noise a bit more random, I added a little more offset to each time the noise played, so that way it wasn't playing the same random set of frequencies each time. It just sounds a little more authentic like that. And just for comparison, here's what it sounds like without the offsets. Yeah, I think that pretty much speaks for itself. And as you can see, we have all the sounds of the 2A03, including the weird buzzes it can make. And now, let's make this tune sound a little more Nintendo. So I'll just change this waveform here. Yep, that should do it. Okay, let's hear how it sounds. Now it's Sega's time to shine, or at least the sound chip that was used in the Master System and the BBC Micro, the SN76489. And as always, well, you know the drill by now. As for what waveforms I used, well, there really isn't much to cover here because this chip is only capable of producing 3 waveforms and I've used all 3. So we have that metallic kind of noise, the period noise, and the square. And of course I've been up to my usual tricks such as rapidly switching the waveforms on channel 1 from noise to bass, and using pitch envelopes to make some 2-note arpeggios. Okay, now on to what I call 8-bit, the infamous Commodore 64 SID chip. So yeah, another classic Rob Hubbard piece there. So let's see how well this can be covered in OpenModplug Tracker. So how many samples do you think I used? 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe more? Nope, just 3. A triangle, the noise, and a full pulse width modulation cycle. And yeah, it recorded a bit weird, but it doesn't affect the sound in any way. And then of course those bare sounds were transformed into the instruments. For instance, here's the triangle part of the kick, and the noise part. I've also used those same 2 waveforms to make the snare. And then of course the rest. So here's our bass line. Now, it sounds as if the bass and the noise are playing at the same time, but actually what's happening is it's switching between the 2, and at no point are they both playing at the same time. So first the noise plays, and then the bass note. So how do I make the noise short and the bass note longer? Well, it's simple. I alternate the speeds. So where the speed is 1, that's where the noise will play, and where the speed is 5, that's where the bass note will play. Of course, it's not possible with sounds that switch waveforms multiple times. As I said before, I had to make the triangle and the noise part of the drums separately. So for the drums, here's the triangle part. And here's the noise part. Yeah, and even though they're on separate channels, I've gone the extra mile to make sure that the triangle and the noise don't overlap each other. And yeah, I've done the same thing for the lead. So what waveforms do we actually have to play with? Well, it's kind of a limited selection here, but all the sounds are here, including those weird sounds that you get when you try to play multiple waveforms on the same channel. A personal favourite of mine being this one here, which sounds a bit like a harpsichord. Yeah, it would sound better with a volume envelope, but you get the idea. And with the pulse width modulation cycles, you don't need to use the full thing. You can just trim out what you don't want, but I've used offsets to do that because, well, I'm weird. Okay, now this almost didn't make it in, because first acquiring the VIC-20 chip samples was hard enough, but recreating the song was also pretty tricky because usually I have some way of separating all the sound layers, so I know what each channel is doing, but not here though. So most of this is just guesswork. Anyway, I'll just briefly go through the samples here. So we have a square wave, sampled at 2 different octaves. That squelchy noise, also sampled at 2 different octaves. Square wave mixed with noise, also at high and low octaves. Square wave mixed with noise but detuned, and you guessed it, at high and low octaves. And finally, the really highest noise that it can make, because you're also going to need that as well. Now here's something I don't think anybody has made a sample bank of. The ZX Spectrum beeper. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail here because if I did, we would be here, well, we'd be here forever. But I have sampled several ZX Spectrum beeper engines. So we have sounds from things such as Wham! The Music Box, the Music Studio, and of course that fuzzy sound that most people associate with the Spectrum. And not only that, but also drums from the various beeper engines. And even the Cheetah Spectrum, which technically isn't a beeper sound, but I just decided to throw it in there as a bonus. And even if you're not into making chip music, there's still a lot of useful sounds here. Like this one here, which sounds really nice when you play chords. Okay, I'm probably facing a lawsuit after that, so let's do something else. There we go, just made the latest chart-topping EDM. Sounds no different to the shit that they're putting out these days, so I could sell that and make millions. Anyway, that's just about it. Now, a download link will be provided in the video description if you want to download it. It's been checked for viruses and everything, so there's no need to worry. The one thing I do need to point out is that even though most of these are WAV files, I've only sampled a few cycles of each waveform, so if you play those or load those into a DAW, you're only going to get short blips, but in OpenModplug Tracker it's going to loop those so you get the full sound. Anyway, like I said at the start, this is all free. I ask for no money in return. I do this because I want to. It's a hobby, not a job. If you paid someone for this sample pack, then let me know. Anyway, I'm Cool Dude Clem, also known as the Music Wizard, and until next time, goodbye.